This webinar is brought to you by BMW and Monotch, and we're absolutely delighted to see so many of you joining us today from all around the world, I can say. My name is Menno Malta and I'm the CEO of Monotch. And for those who don't know Monotch, let me briefly introduce the company. At Monotch, we say we make traffic talk, meaning we connect physical infrastructure, road users, and central systems. Our TDAX platform is used by authorities all over the world as the proven foundation for connected mobility and digital infrastructure. I'm honored to be here today together with Mr. Reinhard Jurk, Senior Automotive Cloud Expert from BMW. Reinhard is an expert in V2X, cloud architecture, and autonomous driving. And today, together, we will propose a new way forward in the domain of CITS. But before we dive into this, I want to take you back to 1865. Go to the next slide, please. In 1865, the British government adopted the Red Flag Act, enforcing a speed limit of 4 miles per hour for cars and the need of having a 3-man crew, including a man with a red flag walking in front of every car. So you can say they created a level playing field for cars and horses. And if you look back at it now, it seems rather silly, because it was a showstopper for adoption of cars for over 30 years in England, until the Red Flag Act was repealed in 1896. So silly. But it's not rare to copy-paste principles from existing technologies on newer ones. So let's look at another example here. So the QWERTY layout of the keyboard was created deliberately to slow down typing, because otherwise the mechanical arms of the typewriters would jam. But we still use this QWERTY layout every day. And this is pretty amazing if you consider that alternative keyboard layouts are estimated to speed up typing with more than 90%. So in this example, the copy-paste mechanism might impact us forever. Now we're here today because we see similar mechanisms in the CITS domain. This is why we have organized this session today. So let's have a look at the agenda. We will start with why we need to reinvent CITS. Then we will take a very brief look at the ecosystem of CITS. And from there, we will move to the leading CITS paradigms and show you how the principle of technology neutrality limits CITS. And we will introduce an alternative in paradigm neutrality and wrap up then with conclusions and Q&A. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function to post them. And you can already do that during the webinar. And we actually encourage you to do that. So with that, let me hand it over to Reinhard.
So thanks, Menno. Welcome also from my side here in Munich. So very good to see that so many people are interested in this very important topic as we think. Let me just introduce myself. So Reinhard Jurk is my name, and I'm in the business for almost 30 years. So I think the number 30 will continue through this talk at various times. I've handling everything connected with the BMW vehicles. So our product offering Connected Drive, where we, since basically 2001, when we started with the first 7 series and WAP, WML technology, for those of you who can remember, with those tiny little browsers and internet and everything, to the first BMW autonomous driving backend in the 2018 years, which we built with some companies and partners. So basically, I'm a connected guy since in all my professional career. And that's the reason why I also deal with this CITS topic. So why are we here in the first place? I mean, 30 years ago, the first CITS thoughts have been evolved. The technology back then was the technology that used to be there. Today, we observe still differing opinions about what's the right way to go. Of course, there is this famous chicken egg problem. So with the current approach, the question remains: is the infrastructure first, or is the consumer, the client, is the vehicle first? And since nobody moves, nothing moves. So that's the reason why the rollout is limited and stalled, and the technology has evolved. And next slide, please. That's basically one of my favorite slides in the whole thing. What is shown is some random milestones in the technology streams: CITS, mobile internet, computer vision, and automated driving. Why those? Because, I mean, the idea of CITS was very good in the first place. So why not have cars talking to one another and infrastructure talking to the cars to increase traffic safety, efficiency, and everything? So the thought was right. But maybe the technological means that we are having have changed. So just take the mobile internet as example. So back then there was like the big A network, B network, C network kind of mobile phones in a suitcase, and 2G networks with no data capability. And we have seen a lot of cellular generations since 30 years. We have xed the data rate, and we have doubled down and quadrupled down and xed down the latency. So we recently had a demonstration in Gothenburg where we basically had a sub-second latency over the backend to the vehicles over mobile network. So there has been lots of involvement. And second, the computer vision part. I mean, everybody knows that computer vision is now in everybody's mind. We have moved from handcrafted neural networks to transformer-based vision models in these days. We have GPUs all over the place in the vehicles and everything. So the sensor setup that is available in vehicles is just incredible. And the neural networks are superhuman, as the experts say, since more than 10 years. So, and this resulted basically in the last swim lane, which says, okay, automated driving. What happened since then? From the first prototypes of the Carnegie Mellon University to Waymo surpassing the taxi business in San Francisco. It's just amazing. And this everything happened without, say, infrastructure or communication infrastructure. So basically, I think the technological toolbox has evolved over the 30 years. So with that, I will hand over to Menno and telling us what are the players in that space.
Yes, so I think to take it from your part, Reinhard, I think you clearly mentioned that there are challenges in the CITS domain, but also new opportunities. And set aside the technology, I think it's important to understand the context of CITS, the ecosystem that CITS lives in. And if we zoom out, then we see that there are really two stakeholders that drive this ecosystem. And these are road authorities and car OEMs. And both have their, let's say, technology providers and service providers, but it's really those two stakeholders that drive this. And I think the content on this slide is fairly well known. I will not go over all the individual bullets. It's also certainly not a complete list. You can debate it. But the key thing is, and that's also why we show this slide, is that the goals are not completely the same for these different stakeholders. And that's something that we should not forget when we look at the future of CITS. And the message here is that if we want to be successful, we need to find a way forward that aligns with the goals and the challenges of these driving stakeholders. Now, if we go to the next slide, where there is alignment is definitely on the use cases. And we are active all over the world, and everywhere we have seen these research reports and sort of first steps on the road of CITS, and we see the same list of use cases everywhere, whether it's the US, the Pacific, Asia, or Europe. So there's clear alignment on those use cases, and that's a good thing. And there's also abundant research available on the benefits of these use cases. And the focus there, and it's the interesting thing to note, I would say, is that the focus has always been very much on societal benefits. But as in any other market, digitalization offers also significant efficiency and cost benefits for the stakeholders. And this is also something we should bear in mind. So with that as sort of the context, the key players and the agreement on use cases, let's have a look at how we implement these use cases today, or how we can implement. And for that, I give it back to you, Reinhard.
Yes, thanks, Menno. Next slide. So one important term that we want to coin in that talk is the term paradigm. And we are always talking about technology neutrality, and we try to take it further and say, okay, we need paradigm neutrality. So what's the big difference? So currently, everything CITS has built about what we call direct paradigm. So traffic participants in infrastructure talking to one another. There's another paradigm, which is the backend paradigm. Basically, traffic participants and infrastructure talk over the backend. And as I said, this is possible with today's mobile network technology. So that's the second paradigm. And the third paradigm, and this relates back to this computer vision swim lane I showed before, is basically the sensor paradigm. So cameras in infrastructure and cameras in vehicles, they can detect things. And that's something that gives immediate benefit to the person sitting in the car and to the national road authorities operating the infrastructure. So basically, there is those three paradigms. And prove me wrong, there's actually a fourth one. Next slide, please. And this paradigm evolves when you combine the sensor and the backend paradigm. So just take any vehicle with a sensor built in and have the detections that this vehicle senses sent to the backend and being distributed to other vehicles as well. And this in a very, say, technology open way. I mean, once you have information in the backend, you could basically broadcast it over good old TMC, for those of you who remember that technology, to a 90s radio in some 90s Volkswagen Beetle car that still has a DIN radio built in. So you're very flexible in distributing the data once you have it in the backend. A second advantage of having data in the backend is that you can apply all sorts of data fusion technology. Everybody's talking about AI these days. So the fuel for AI is data, and you have this data available in the backend. And you can augment it with other data. You can fuse it with available map data. You can historize it with data that you had before. So that's they're very capable paradigm in combining those. And that's the thing that we say, okay, we need to stop judging everything with the metrics that we have out of just one paradigm, which is the direct paradigm, and open up the space for getting the job done and not taking something that has been built with a certain paradigm in mind and judge the other paradigms with it. And a very good example for that initiative is the Data for Road Safety initiative, as many of you are aware, I know, where we are doing exactly this, where vehicles share data with one another over a backend and leveraging all the advantages that I have been mentioning: augmentation, fusion, historization, and distribution capabilities. So that's the very technical view, but there's also a societal and a business view to it. Next slide, please. And that is how is the risk that you have and how is the benefit distributed? Because this risk benefit thing is what makes people take decisions. So you wouldn't take any risky decision if you don't have any benefit from it. And as it happens, and this is shown in this chart, there's unfortunately a bad correlation between high risk and not very many benefits in those paradigms. So in the left lower part, we have the sensor-based paradigm. So it's immediate that the person sitting in the car with the sensor has benefits from this sensor being in that car. It's very immediate that the road authority who installs a camera on an intersection has benefits from having this camera in this intersection. So the immediacy of the benefit is very quick, and the risk is very low. Yeah. And if you're going to the upper right corner with the diacoms paradigm, it's exactly the opposite. You have a high risk because if not enough participants participate, you don't have any benefit. And even if you had, it takes a very long time till you get the benefit. So it's basically a bad correlation that we are seeing there between those paradigms. And this is also the reason why we observe what we observe, namely, what is the coverage of this technology, Menno?
Yes. So yeah, if you look at this coverage, and this is for the EU, obviously, where we look at the two sort of sides of the ecosystem, roadside and vehicle. And to start with the roadside coverage, and what we see roughly around 2,000 RSUs live and deployed in Europe today, which brings around 0.3% coverage of the roads. If we look at the cellular networks, 4G and 5G combined, we see around 95% coverage of the roads. And for the sensors, this is on the infrastructure side, we really can't tell. It's not possible to find details there. This is, of course, done by all the individual road authorities. Now, if you look at the vehicle coverage, we see basically a similar situation where we have now around 2.5 million vehicles in Europe that have the direct communication capabilities. So that's roughly 1% of the vehicles. And we have around 70% of the vehicles that are equipped with cellular communication, where 40% has this, let's say, native out of the factory, and 30% is retrofitted with the communication technology. And for the sensors, again, it's a bit harder to find the numbers, but we know that around 34% of the vehicles is ADAS equipped, so has the sensors for that. But we also know there are actually many more vehicles with sensors on the European roads. And this is important to realize, because if we want to have impact in the foreseeable future, we need also to work with what we have. And I think in this coverage numbers, we also see reflected the investment sort of dynamics that you shared in the slide before, Reinhard. So this is basically the situation that we have today. Now let's have a look at the approach, the model of approach that we have today. And a fundamental aspect there, in general, in EU regulation, is technology neutrality. What this means is that regulations should focus on functions or services rather than on the specific technical solutions. And this is a good thing, and the principle has also been applied to CITS. However, if you look closely at the standards today and the work in progress, you see that the use case specifications from the direct, what this means in CITS now today, is that use case specifications from the direct communication paradigm are now applied to all solution models. And we call that technology neutrality, but we can question that if it is really technology neutrality. It is understandable though, because when CITS originated, as we've seen on one of the earlier slides, direct communication was really the only viable option 30 years ago. So it's understandable, but it's not helping us. And let me show you two examples of this mechanism. Suzanne, we can go to the next slide. Now, there are much more examples, and for that, please have a look at the white paper that's available for download. But here we took two examples, and I will start with the latency example. And I remember the use case table that we showed before. Actually, in many of these reports that are referenced to, we see that list being connected to certain latency requirements. So basically, we have a use case, immersive vehicle approaching, for instance, and that has a certain latency requirement attached to that use case. And then we say that's technology neutral. And this makes sense in the direct communication paradigm, as the range of communication is of course limited. But in the backend paradigm, range is not a factor at all. And in the sensor paradigm, latency is basically not existing. So if we go back to these emergency vehicle approaching warnings or blue light warnings, of course these vehicles drive very fast when they are on an emergency trip. And therefore, as the direct communication range is limited, the latency is a crucial thing. But in the backend paradigm, speed and direction are shared well ahead of an encounter, and this completely changes the latency requirements. So as latency requirements or having the same latency requirements for different technologies may seem something as that is technology neutral, it is in reality very similar to mandating the same speed for horses and cars, as we've seen in the Red Flag Act. The second example is security. And today many feel that all individual CITS messages should be signed in all solution models. And this requires a quite complex and expensive PKI infrastructure. And this also has been proven to be a showstopper in deployment today. And again, this makes 100% sense in the direct communication paradigm where messages are broadcasted over public frequencies. But in the backend, you typically have a trust relationship on a connection level, just like you have security organized when you do your online banking. Also, certainly a very secure application. And by organizing trust on the connection level, you really reduce the number of parties that are part of the trust ecosystem. Of course, you still need to organize that, but the complexity and the cost are completely different. And in fact, if you think about signing messages in the backend paradigm, it would actually mean that an authority would invest in signing messages on the central site, then share those signed messages over an already secure channel with the backend of the car OEM. And literally the first thing that car OEM would do is actually strip off the messages, because the signing, because the signature adds roughly 30% overhead. And this raises the cost of communication on a cellular channel. So this example is actually very similar to the QWERTY example, where we add something to for a specific technology and then copy that to, for instance, the computer keyboards. So we argue that we should, if we look at these two examples, sorry, that was a bit too quick. If you can go back to the previous slide. Thank you. And we argue that we should look at these requirements on a higher abstraction level. So latency should not be defined in milliseconds or in time, but really about what you need for a use case in a certain technology model. And security should not be focused on message signing, but really should be focused on preventing falsification of messages. So it's a combination of security and message provenance, actually. With that, we can go to the next slide. So here we have taken one use case, in this example, roadworks warning, and shown that there are different ways to deliver this use case, still with the same outcome for the driver or the road user. And I also give you a moment to look at this slide again. I will not go over all the bullets. I don't think you will see any surprising. Direct communication, roadworks warning trailer will send out warnings, vehicle will receive that in the range, and then of course you need to sign those messages because you are on a public frequency. And in the backend, well, you share these warnings through the backend ecosystem, and then the car OEM can bring it into the car, and you use TLS security and all these things that we use every day in all our let's say applications, secure applications that are not ITS. And we can warn vehicles then, well, within every range that we want to, really depending on the use case and the functionality. And here the sensors, of course, you can also use cameras to sensor roadworks and then bring that information in the in-car systems. And if you combine backend and sensors, it becomes even more powerful. In general, this is something we can say, the more paradigms we combine, the more powerful the functionality will be and the more impact we will have. So, but there's a funny thing here, because I just described 4 ways to deliver this solution. But today, 3 of those 4 solution models are actually not considered CITS in Europe. And the impact is there, the outcome is there. However, for instance, because messages are not signed, these solutions models are now called non-CITS models. And this shows, or should show to all of us, that somewhere along the road we have lost the focus on outcome and impact, and we have stepped towards a focus on technology, which we think is not helping us forward. So, go to the next slide. It's time that we really scrutinize our way of thinking to make sure that we don't block solution models with biased requirements. And this is what we call today paradigm neutrality. So Reinhard, please, can you elaborate a bit on this principle?
Yeah, next slide, please. So basically, reiterating this paradigm neutrality, what do we need to do to get out of this situation? So to state it really clearly, we need to stop calling something only CITS if it complies with metrics stemming from just one paradigm, and the one being the direct communication paradigm. So that we just need to stop doing this. This is, Menno gave the security example. So if we just consider it CITS, if every message is signed, and we just consider it CITS if it complies, if any message complies to some standard, we are not leveraging the technological capabilities we have at hand in the year 2026. That's clear. So with the backend paradigm in mind, you just don't have that much need of standardize every message, for example, and to sign every message, because you have, as I stated, you have the capabilities of the backend to combine data points, to historize data points, to fuse data points. It's just that you have different possibilities. So stop calling something only CITS if it complies to the direct communication paradigm. Then, as we see, we still see that we have this stallment in the adoption, and that there's a reason for that. That's a structural reason, as we explained. If we stay on that path, we will not have the benefits that we all wish that we have. So that's the reason why we propose this constructive alternative I'm going to show on the next slide. Which is basically, as Menno said, we have to reassess what we want to reach, and not fight technological wars and wars in terminology, but we need to say, okay, what we want to reach is increase of traffic safety and efficiency, and whatever technology and whatever paradigm gets the job done should be used. We should incorporate this paradigm thinking, so stop measuring one paradigm with the metrics of the other paradigms. And that's what we hopefully made clear, that it's very important that we judge any technology with the respective metrics that it should be judged with. And especially for the policymakers in the room, we should prioritize and also put the money in something that really works, and not in some technology that we think we need to adopt. And then hopefully we will get some bigger impact in the next decade than we did in the last 30 years. Yeah, with this, Menno, I leave you the really concluding words.
Thank you. Thank you, Reinhard. Yeah. And maybe also just what are the benefits? And this relates to a question that we got also when we did this presentation at the Intertraffic event. So why is it so important? Why do you want this? And well, first of all, I think that's the key question. We care because we see that the benefits that are possible, that we all, as an ecosystem, we don't have these benefits. So in a way, every day that we don't deploy, we lose. We lose in safety, we lose in efficiency, we lose in traffic flow. And we're just used to that, so we don't feel it as a loss, but it really is. So this is what I call the opportunity costs of CITS. And this is why we care deeply and want to find a way forward that leads to deployment and these benefits on the roads. And our plea is not a plea for a certain technology. That's also a key thing to mention. Our plea is to be pragmatic, to step back to the concept of CITS, Cooperative Intelligent Transport Systems. We should step back to that principle, to that concept, and start delivering that in scale to massive amounts of road users, leading to potentially massive benefits. We also don't know how the future will look like. So we need to have, the only thing that we know that we will see more and different technologies coming on the market, such as AI, for instance, which was not there 30 years ago, also not there 5 years ago. So how will the world look like in 5 to 10 years from now? We really don't know. But we want to be able to use all these technologies to deliver the benefits of CITS. So by sort of stepping back to the concept of CITS and focusing on this CITS, universal CITS paradigm, we will also see greater flexibility for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. So individual road authorities, car OEMs can decide how they bring this use case to life, as long as the outcome for the road user, for the authority, is harmonized. So greater flexibility is definitely a big benefit of that different approach. And then the access to mature and widely deployed technologies is another benefit, because we're not unique, though we sometimes feel that in the mobility world we are unique on a technology level. We are not, and there's so much work being done in different industries that we can use today already. So we should use those already widely deployed technologies to get to the benefits. And then future-proof, as I said, we don't know what technology is coming, but we want to use everything that we can to deliver those benefits and get it going. So with that, if you can go to the next slide, Suzanne. BMW and Monotch wrote this white paper and we planned this webinar because we are committed to the rollout of CITS. And then we speak to CITS on the conceptual level. So this presentation is not the end of that. We will continue our journey, and the next step is to showcase a set of use cases and data sharing in a paradigm agnostic setup that is beneficial for all the stakeholders in this ecosystem. And we'll be looking at something that's affordably deployable and that is deployable on scale within a matter of years instead of decades. So please stay tuned for further news from the two of us. In the meantime, feel free to download the white paper. I think you will also receive an email after this webinar with the link to it. I know many of you have already downloaded the white paper. But again, stay tuned for further news. And with that, we open the floor for Q&A and debate, to say so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhard and Menno. So I've seen our first questions come in already. So I think there are lots of questions here. And do remember, everybody, please input your questions in the Q&A. I will not be able to hear you if you speak to me right now. So our first question is from Mache. His question is, in this paradigm neutrality principle, on which level do you think standards are necessary? So whether it's message formats, functional requirements for use cases, data quality, or interfaces between the backends. Or do you think that standards are not needed? It's more of a free-for-all, whatever works, works.
I would take this, Menno, if it's okay for you.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's a very good example. Thanks for the question. I mean, if you put yourself to the direct communication paradigm, where a car needs to react within milliseconds on something it receives from the other car, there is no time for interpretation of this data, and basically there is no further knowledge to interpret the data. That's the reason why the hard standardization need is very important in the direct communication paradigm. If you take, on the other hand, the backend paradigm, basically the only standard you need, and even that would be questionable, is IP. IP, Internet Protocol. IP is here to stay. You could send messages over UDP. You could send messages over MQTT. You can send messages over HTTP. You name it. You can use the backend to fuse various data sources. And that's the power of AI, that you don't even need standardization on the application level, because as we know, with machine learning, you just would know that a certain data source behaves in a certain way, and you don't need to exactly know what this data source is actually doing, because you can observe it in the backend, and you can make sense of the observations that you get, also by fusing it with historical data and with other data sources. So to clearly answer the question, the more direct you think, the more standardization you need, and vice versa.
Maybe I would like to add a bit to that. So I completely agree with that. I think it's standards are beneficial also in the, let's say, the other paradigms. In the backend paradigm, standards are beneficial, but there's no need to wait for a standard, because really converting a message format from one type to another, or bridging AMQP and MQTT or UDP or TCP or WebSocket or whatever, all these things, I mean, are quite easy. So today what we see often is that sort of there's a pause, because their stakeholders are waiting for more and more complete standards, and they're never perfect, of course. And especially with this wave of new technologies, they're never completely finished. So I add to the statement of Reinhard that we do value standards. I think they're beneficial. They help us go faster, but we should not wait for that, because outside the direct communication paradigm, it's actually quite easy to bridge differences.
Oh, a lot more questions coming in. So maybe I have one from Christian Cousins. One of the things he mentioned, that this paradigm neutrality that you speak of, we've listed all the stakeholders. However, in terms of the overall picture, it's still, well, there's still a discovery process. It's not complete yet. How, and for a stakeholder to consider their position, how do they consider their position in such a paradigm neutrality world? I believe there are many attendees here, or both representing companies and governments who are writing their strategies in this domain. But how do you create this? Do we need more dialogue between the different stakeholders, or how can we move forward in this neutral way?
I would, if I can start here, I think it starts with use cases and impact outcome that you're looking for. So what are you trying to accomplish, and how can you get there? The sooner the better, basically. So I think that should be the focus of a strategy. And of course, what we said in the slides of the universal paradigm is that you need harmonization on the use case level. So of course, the drivers or the road users need to have some kind of know what to expect. So I think it's still important to keep the work going. Lots of the work that we have done is, I mean, all of that is important and relevant. The thing that we need to change is really focus on deployment and impact that you're looking for. And from there, then you find the best tools in your toolbox. And whether that is, well, whatever you choose, as long as the use case becomes deployed. So that would be my advice.
And really get operative, if I might add this. So if I cite again the Data for Road Safety initiative here in Europe, that's basically just do it. Yeah, as we said, don't wait for anything, just do it, and then get going, learn, adapt. All the modern way of developing things. You might call it agile if this term is not overused already, but just do it and learn. Learn fast. Don't think and wait, but do it and learn fast.
We have a sort of a follow-up question from Tony Samet. In this way, how do we aim to change the focus from some of these quite entrenched but influential groups in the sector into this type of thinking? Difficult one.
Well,
what comes to my mind is by doing webinars like this one. Yeah, I think we need to sort of open up the thinking space again. Yeah, so get out of the trenches and get working.
Yeah. So I think we need to show it, and we are partly doing that. There are deployments that actually show these principles, but today we don't call it CITS or officially we cannot call it CITS. But I think these examples also are very important. And I mean, one of the examples is for me is the blue light warnings that we have in the Netherlands, where we have all the ambulances connected, and by the end of this year we will have all the fire trucks connected, and we have now around 25 to 35% of all the vehicles on the road that actually receive these warnings. So I think these examples are also crucial to show to others.
Yeah, and I think this partially answers Walter's question right now, which is, with this kind of paradigm, how does it help solve the chicken and egg dilemma? In general, how does it accelerate investment in the private sector? So car makers, road operators, on concessionaries. I think, Menno, you mentioned a very good example here, which is, yes, there are real life deployments and also business models supporting that. Maybe you can go a little bit more into how this could break the current standstill in a way.
Did you now already answer the question, Gary?
No, I mean, in a way, but also, is that the only way to break the chicken and egg? Because what we're doing in the Netherlands, how do we replicate that, let's say?
Well, I hear maybe, but Reinhard, I think you also have something to say about this, but I think this relates directly to the impact, the investment dynamics of the different technologies. So if you remember that graph, that the more you get upright, the bigger the chicken and egg problem is, because it takes you invest and then the delay to get the benefits is very long, and that leads to the chicken and egg situation. So with sensors you don't have that at all, and that's why they're already abundantly there. So I think by choosing a model that lowers that barriers, that investment dynamics, you will have less of a chicken and egg problem. So we use technologies that are already there. And I actually think that could also open up the way in the future for direct communication as a tool, because if these use cases become a part of our daily life, then it's also easier to add use cases on that technology channel. So I think it can actually help that forward. And I'm also trying to answer one of the questions that I see, like, what is the future for direct communication? And I mean, I cannot look into the future, but I think that the past 30 years we have not been able to get to success. So we need a different approach. But for me, that doesn't mean that technology is dead or something like that. But I just think the approach should be updated, to say so. But also interested to hear the thoughts of Reinhard here.
But that's a good one, what you mentioned last. I mean, there's always the discussions about vulnerable road users, yeah, and how do they fit in this thing. And I didn't put this on this technology swim lane chart, but there's a technology called ultra wideband these days, which hasn't been there like 5 years ago. And with ultra wideband, everybody's taking an ultra wideband sensor with it by means of his mobile phone in his pocket. So why don't we use this technology to locate vulnerable road users? Yeah, so that's again one of those examples, as our technology toolkit has just evolved over 30 years, and we now can choose from a much broader variety of solution spaces. So why limit our thinking? Yeah, so that's just as you said with the direct communication. That's direct, but it's a different technology. Second, how do we do this chicken and egg thing? I mean, basically, there is no chicken and egg thing, because if you now deliver some data to, say, again, data for road safety, it's being used by road authorities as we speak, as of today. So there are cars sending data that are ending up in the operation centers of national road authorities today. So no chicken, no egg. It just works. The meal is cooked.
I have another question here from Holger. You mentioned on slide 17, you said that no data is shared via backends. He has a question stating that independent from information shared via direct communication, road operators now are also in Europe obliged to provide information safety related and real-time traffic information through the NAPs and DATEX2. While he recognized there's still some room for improvement, what is the gap that is here between what's available on the NAP versus what data is available through, let's say, direct communication? What is the missing gap here?
Great question. I think a couple of things actually. First of all, what we see is that there's sort of a split, that some use cases are, let's say, national access point use cases, and some use cases are labeled as CITS. So I think that's something that we should stop doing. And then the NAPs are really one way. So it's data that's pushed out by the authorities. But if we want to get to the full benefits, we need to have a bidirectional ecosystem. And that's today not possible in the NAPs. But it can I mean, sometimes I wonder, and also here, for instance, observation in the Netherlands, where we have the national access point, and then we have this more low latency, more real-time data exchange that is bidirectional, and that is now formally not part of the national access point. I think in the end, all of these domains have to come together. It's really not productive to separate it from each other. So I think the gap here, to wrap up the answer, the gap is that we should not label use cases as national access point use cases or as CITS use case. We should be more flexible in the data types that we use there. So now it's national access point, always DATEX. Why is that the case? And we should make it bidirectional. And then I don't really care whether it's a national access point or an interchange or whatever we call it. That's just if I take a hammer or a screwdriver out of my toolbox for me.
And if I might add, what's also, of course, missing is the data from the actual traffic participants, say the vehicles. Yeah. So because that data is currently not available in the NAPs, and how should it? Yeah. That's this understanding that we need, that traffic participants, vehicles, as an example, they know what's going on the street. So that's a very important sensor, in contrast to the traditional chain of operations of a national road authority, by having like some police car doing some messaging or stuff, or something like this. So I think that this distributed nature of the vehicle as a sensor is not being you cannot do with the apps as they are today, and that's the reason why we need this data exchange thinking of the backend paradigm.
Question for you, Reinhard, from Maria Gatz. From a practical side, how would you approach integrating paradigm agnostic V2X interfaces in the vehicle itself?
Say again, how would I
approach integrating paradigm agnostic V2X interfaces in the vehicle itself?
I mean, the good thing about this approach by using the existing channels, as I said. So if you have an information available in the backend, you can broadcast it by good old TMC with all the shortcomings that we have, location reference and everything. Or you can broadcast it by a, say, tile-based push mechanism that has a sub-millisecond latency in getting the information to the vehicle. So you can fan out the knowledge that you have in the backend by various technologies, and that's basically the answer to this question. So distributing knowledge out of a backend doesn't care about the channel to the vehicle.
And if I may ask a follow-up question myself here. So, and inside the vehicle, so inside the vehicle, then you would have the sensor information, the backend information, possibly direct communication information. That implies, I guess, some kind of fusing, possibly also in the vehicle, or.
Yes, that's right. I mean, of course, the vehicle has its sensor setup, and the vehicle and the vehicle manufacturer, if you're talking SAE level 3, has the responsibility for the vehicle operations. So the final decision is being taken in the vehicle. And that's basically a fusion of what the vehicle sees by its sensor setup, be it camera, be it LiDAR, be it radar, be it V2X, be it direct communication, whatever. But this fusion happens in the vehicle because the vehicle is ultimately the point where the safety is increased.
Question from Lewis here. In a autonomous vehicle dominated future, the driving AI system will probably not need as much data as they perceive further and better at risk judgment than human drivers. His question is, could we be trying to build a data infrastructure that will not be needed in the future? Or are there specific use cases here that is actually very complementary to autonomous vehicle that we can discuss here?
I mean, the proof of this question that the answer is you don't need it is the autonomous deployment as we see it today in China and the US. All of those deployments work without direct communication. So they even actually, if we are completely honest, they work without backend communication as well. Yeah, so because an autonomous vehicle, you cannot guarantee that it has connectivity in neither paradigm, by the way. You cannot guarantee that the vehicle in front of you is equipped with a direct communication box. You cannot assume that. So you need to design your system from functional safety perspective, 26262 ISO, 61508 ISO. You need to design your system that it doesn't rely on the availability of a direct com or even backend communication. You need to design it like this. Yeah. So that's the reason why we think that it needs to be an autonomous decision in the truest sense of the word by the vehicle, by the sensor setup, and using as much data that it can get from additional channels, but the final decision is on the vehicle side.
I'd like to add to that we do see challenges in, at least that I know in the US with robotaxis, autonomous vehicles, that there are situations where they indeed would benefit from external data. Not so much for, because now they stop when they can get into a situation where they cannot make a decision anymore. They simply stop and an operator has to take over, and their data can help. So I think I cannot say too much about it, but we're also involved in these discussions, and I think we will see a bit of data sharing that will be added also there. But another part of this question here is that we live today, it's 2026. The cars that are out on the roads today will still be here in 10 years. Many of them will still be here in 10 years. So we need to ensure safety and all the traffic efficiency, flow efficiency, also the next 10 years. So I don't think we can say like, okay, let's stop doing everything, because in 10 or 20 years, we will only have autonomous cars, which is also not a certainty, definitely not a certainty today that we can say that. So I wouldn't say that we should just simply sort of stop this and wait for autonomous cars.
Going for question. Question from Lewis here. Can you clarify how federated integration works in your model? Specifically, what kind of data is exposed to federation and what level of access do consumers have?
So there, I think two examples, like the NAPs that have been mentioned before. Yeah, so you can access data by the national access points, or if I refer back to data for road safety again, you can get the information from a international data space compliant data space, which currently is the mobility data space in Germany. So that's basically the federation. The data that you get there comes from various sources, and you can get this data and do your service development with that data, if this answers the question.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I mean, you mentioned the demonstration in Gothenburg a couple of weeks ago, Reinhard, and there we, BMW connected to a federated network of interchanges, also data exchanges from different road authorities, in this case, Norway, Flanders in Belgium, and Sweden, Trafikverket. So I think federation is valuable, especially in the back-end paradigm, combined with a very good governance on the data. So the second part of the question here is, who's allowed to get access to that data? And that's part of the governance. So there are perfect ways to manage that already today. And today, I think indeed the data spaces initiative, but also the C roads interchanges and the II interface there completely solve this question.
Klaus here mentioned that we should also not forget about the trucks as a very important group of the mobility groups. So there are also millions of trucks that can be connected through CITS applications. And is that also key stakeholder groups that you see that can move the needle here?
Reinhard,
Currently, not as much as I would want it to. Yeah, so you're perfectly right, and trucks have the big benefit that usually they are on the road for quite a long time, and usually they are well equipped with sensors. So yes, out of DFRS we are approaching. I mean, we have a collection of companies that do have a truck business. And hopefully they will join the party at some point in the future.
Okay. I think we're gonna go with one last question from Andy, which he mentioned as a follow-up question. He mentions that specifically the age of vehicles in Europe is rising, also in the UK as well, where he's from. His question is, how do we deal with older and perhaps more risky vehicles, maybe from the early 2000s, so that they're also part of this discussion?
Well, in the down channel, I said that every vehicle, no matter what the down channel technology it uses, from TMC to IP-based traffic information, benefits from what you have in the backend. So that's the good thing. The other thing is with the older vehicles, that's what I said. When you design the functional safety of an autonomous vehicle, you need to deal with the fact that you cannot assume that the vehicle in front of you sends a signal. So you need to rely on your sensors. So that's part of the game that we need to do. That the sensor needs to make sure that this vehicle is detected, even if it doesn't have this communication capability.
And Andy also challenges Reinhard, because Andy is the technical director of the ITS World Congress in Birmingham next year, October. And he has challenges to showcase our work there. So thank you for that challenge, Andy.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, thanks for the invitation indeed. With that, I think we are at the time that we had for this webinar. I really want to thank everyone for joining us again, and we look forward to constructive debates for the future, and hopefully deployment of CITS in this universal paradigm that we have mentioned. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.